How you guys doing? Yes, before any of you say, I got my quarantine haircut, So rocking the mohawk, training for Thunderdome with Mr. T and the A team, We're going to focus on our history today, though, all right? You guys should have all gotten your first Reconstruction era packet on your Google Classroom. Hopefully you have that open as well. We're going to start by going through kind of the preliminary stuff, and then we'll go through the first of the primary sources, which is by Thaddeus Stevens. Okay, so we'll do that today, and then we'll move on to Andrew Johnson during another live session tomorrow. Okay, so we'll get going there. So whenever we have questions, go ahead and just type them up in the live stream. I'll answer them as best I can. Okay, but we're just going straight through that document right now. Okay. So we finished talking about the actual Civil War, right? We wrapped that up last week. Now we're looking at the time period directly after the Civil War, which is known as Reconstruction. Okay. So that time period is going to go from the end of the Civil War in 1865 up until 1877. Okay, that's going to be the time frame we're looking at. So 12 years, a 12-year time frame right now. Now, as we saw at the end of last week, John Wilkes Booth, who was a Confederate sympathizer, right? That means he agreed with the Confederacy. He did not like the Union, right? He assassinated President Lincoln 5 days after Robert E. Lee, who was the general in charge of the South, right? The Confederacy, after he surrendered. Okay. So as we talked about in December, if the president is killed, right, the vice president takes over. Okay, so the vice president under Lincoln at the beginning of his second term was Andrew Johnson. So Andrew Johnson is going to become the new president now. Now, he is a Southerner. Okay, he was a Democrat. Okay, remember, Lincoln was a Republican, right? At this time, the Republicans are generally those who are against slavery, right? They're more abolitionists, right? And the Democrats tended to have stronger support in the slaveholding states. There were still Democrats who were against it, and there were still Republicans who were for that. Okay, but Andrew Johnson is a Democrat. Okay, and he is from the South. He's from Tennessee. Okay, so even though, right, Lincoln won the election in the North, the South didn't participate. He had a more Southern vice president. Okay, and we're going to see how that plays out with how Johnson really wants to tackle this period right after the Civil War. Okay. So he tends to be much more sympathetic to these southern states, okay, than a lot of the northerners would want. A lot of the people in Congress are part of a group that are known as radical Republicans. Now, radical just means extreme. It does not necessarily mean good or bad. Okay, it just means extreme. So the radical Republicans wanted to see extreme changes in the country after the Civil War. They did not just want to go back to the status quo. Okay, they did not want to go back to the way things were before. They saw their duty as really changing the country and using this period after the Civil War to make big changes. Okay, part of that involves punishing the South for the Civil War. Okay, because they see it as the South being the South's fault. Yeah. Now, that is very much against what Lincoln was proposing when he won his election. In his second inauguration speech, right, the speech where he takes over as president the second time, okay, he said he was going to be kind to the South. Okay, that's what he said. Obviously, we'll never know what his actual plan would have been, okay, and how he would have reacted after the Civil War, okay, because he was assassinated. Okay, but he said he was going to be very fair with the South. The radical Republicans say no. They say we need to punish the South for this whole catastrophe of a war. Okay. The radical Republicans also are pushing for equal rights for the newly freed slaves. Yeah. And we're going to take a look at the amendments to the Constitution next week that they pushed forward, ending slavery, right to vote, things like that. Okay, we're going to take a look at that next week. Okay. So some of the major questions that the country is facing after the Civil War are, how is the South going to be rebuilt? Okay, the South in particular is torn up by the Civil War. Okay, that is where the vast majority of the battles took place. We looked at things like Sherman, right, in his march to the sea, burning Atlanta to the ground, tearing up the railroads on his march. Okay, and this is happening all over the South during the war. Okay, so how are we going to rebuild the South? What is going to be the process for letting the Confederate States back into the country? Are they just going to be states again automatically? Are they going to have all the same rights? Are there going to be restrictions? Okay, we need to figure this out. And what are we going to do with all the former slaves? How are they going to be treated in this new country? Okay, so these are some of the big questions we're trying to figure out during this period of Reconstruction. Okay. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers died during the Civil War. Okay. And counts vary, right, depending on how you're counting, but it's approximately 750,000. Okay, that is more Americans that died in that war than any other war in American history. Okay, so lots of people were dead after this. And we have over 4 million former slaves who are now free. Okay, so lots of numbers are being thrown out in how we're going to deal with it. This is affecting a lot of people. Okay. So how are we going to bring the country back together after being split for 5 years? Okay, so looking at consequences for the Confederacy. Okay, are they going to be blamed for the war? Okay, are they going to be recognized as citizens? Are they going to face any sort of punishment? Okay, what about the governments, right? The governments that the South had during the war were different from the governments that they had when the whole country was together. Okay, so how are we going to reorganize that? Okay, so these are, again, some of the questions that we're trying to figure out during this time period. Okay. So up to this point, okay, African Americans, right, had been systematically dehumanized, and we talked about the dehumanization, okay, with regards to slavery, okay, for over 200 years. Okay, we looked at things like the Dred Scott case, which showed that slaves during this point, during this time period, had no legal rights. Okay, whether they were enslaved or whether they were free, right? African Americans were not being given any rights during this time period. Okay, so now things are starting to change, right? We're seeing, after the Emancipation Proclamation in particular, African Americans providing very critical support to the fight of the Civil War, right? To the Union side. Okay, they were spies, they were cooks, they were soldiers. Okay, they did a lot of different things to support the war. Okay, it's about 10% of the Union Army were African Americans. Okay, which is a small percentage, but it's a lot of people. Okay, remember, these are thousands upon thousands of soldiers, okay, that are making up the Union Army. Okay. They are often doing the hardest, most dangerous work in the Army. Okay, so they've really paid a steep price during the war. Okay, and they by far suffer the worst consequences if they are ever captured by the Southern soldiers. Right, so during the war, if you are African American and you get caught by the Confederacy, you are going to be treated way worse than a white soldier from the North who was captured by the Confederacy. Yeah. So how are these newly freed slaves going to be treated in the South? How are they going to be treated in the North? Okay, is either section of the countries, are any of the regions going to fully accept them as citizens? Okay, so again, these are questions that we're facing. Okay. So any questions on anything, just kind of setting up Reconstruction and some of the issues that are facing the country at this time before we get into our first primary source of the day? Okay, that's fine. We're going to keep moving. If you do have questions, okay, again, just put them in, type them out in the stream, okay, and I'll answer them as best I can. We are moving on to the first primary source that we have in that packet that you guys got assigned today. It is by Thaddeus Stevens. Okay, so Thaddeus Stevens is a member of the House of Representatives. Remember, that is the lower house of Congress. Okay, and he is from Pennsylvania. He is the leader of the Radical Republican Party. And again, these are the Republicans who are more extreme in their ideas of really creating change, drastic change in the country, okay? Wanting to punish the South, wanting to support newly freed African American rights, okay? So he is the leader of that party, or of that section of the Republican Party. Okay, and so what we're going to read right now is an excerpt, or it's a part of a speech that he gives to Congress on March 19th in 1867. Okay, so this is a couple years after the Civil War actually ended. The cause of the war was slavery. We have liberated the slaves. It is our duty to protect them and provide for them while they are unable to provide for themselves. None will deny the right to confiscate the property of the Southern states, as they all made war as the Confederate States of America. The bill provides that each freed slave who is a male adult or the head of a family will receive 40 acres of land with $100 to build a house. Homesteads are far more valuable than the immediate right of suffrage, though they should receive both. 4 million people have just been freed from slavery. They have no education, have never worked for money, and don't know about their rights. We must make the freed slaves independent of their old masters so that they may not be compelled to work for them upon unfair terms, which can only be done by giving them a small tract of land to farm. Okay, so that was a piece of his speech that he gave to Congress, again, March 19th in 1867. A couple of the vocab words there, right? When he's talking about confiscating, okay, that's taking someone's property. Okay, so he thinks that the federal government, right, the national government, has the right to take property away from Southerners, okay, whether it's the states or individual people. He thinks they should be able to take that property. And he thinks that they should be able to give it to the newly freed slaves, right? His idea is that every family, right, every adult male, okay, or whoever is in charge of the family, okay, should get 40 acres of land, okay, which is not a lot of land, okay, but it is something that where they could build a house, right? Have enough. He also thinks they should get enough money to build a house, $100, okay, which again, right, today not as much money, okay, then it would have been more, okay, still not a whole lot, okay, but it would have been enough to get them started, okay. So that's his idea, and he thinks that they have the right to do that because the Confederate States started the war, right? That's it. That's his idea. He said they made war as the Confederate States. They tried to leave, and so now we have the right to confiscate their property to deal it back out to the newly freed African Americans. Okay, another one of the vocab words is homestead. Okay, so that is a piece of land that is given by the government, okay, to a citizen who lives and farms on it, right? So they're not buying it, right? So he's not suggesting that the government sells land to African Americans. He's saying we should just give it to them, right? They need this to be able to get started. Okay, so the government is going to take land from Southerners, right, and give it to African Americans, right? That is his idea. Okay, suffrage, which we've talked about before, right, is the right to vote. Okay, so Thaddeus Stevens says that giving them this land and letting them get started with land and money to build a house is more important than suffrage, more important than the right to vote, okay, because then they can actually support themselves and their family. He says they should get both, right? Thaddeus Stevens does believe that African Americans should get the right to vote. Okay, that is important for him, but he says more important is this idea of giving them land so that they can support themselves. Okay. And tract, okay, our last vocab word for this primary source is just a small piece of land, right? It's another word for a small area of land. Okay, so what they're being given. Okay, and so for Thaddeus Stevens, okay, he wants all the slaves, right, all the former slaves to have the right to vote. Okay, but again, more importantly, he wants to give them 40 acres of land with enough money to build a house. Okay, and he wants them to be able to do this for a very specific reason. Okay, says they do not want, or he does not want rather, the former slaves to have to rely on their former masters, right, the former owners. Okay, for a lot of African Americans, they're not leaving the area that they were formerly enslaved on, right? A lot of them are staying in the same area, right? This is the only place they've known their whole life. This is where their family is, right? So some of them are leaving and moving west, moving north, but a lot of them are staying in the South. And so Thaddeus Stevens says if they stay there and that's all they know, right, and we don't give them any land, we don't help them get started, then they're going to end up, okay, relying on the people that used to be their owners. And those former owners are not going to treat them fairly. Okay, they're going to take advantage of them, okay, because there's nothing else, right? The African Americans don't have any education, right? Remember, it was illegal to educate your slaves, right? They haven't worked for money before, right? They've only worked as slaves for the most part, right? That means that they're not going to have the experience of negotiating a contract, of deciding what's fair, okay, what's not, okay? And they don't know their rights. Very few people at this point in time understand what their rights are, right? This is a very new experience for everyone. Okay, so knowing your rights, being educated, okay, knowing how to construct a contract, okay, to work, okay, these are all new experiences. Okay, and so Thaddeus Stevens sees that the white former owners are most likely going to take advantage of these former slaves that have no other choice but to work for them. Okay, so he doesn't want them to get taken advantage of. So he says if we give them the land to farm for themselves and enough money to build their own house, then they can support themselves and their families. And they don't need to rely on anyone else. And when they do, okay, come to negotiate contracts, they'll be able to say no if it's not fair because they have their own land to fall back on. They already have their own home. They're able to support their family. So they have more options. Okay, so that's his idea. Thaddeus Stevens, right? So again, this is an example of the radical Republicans and what they want to do, particularly in the South, right? And how they want to treat African Americans, okay, during this Reconstruction period just after the Civil War. Okay. All right. So again, this packet is going to be due on Sunday. Okay, we'll go through the next primary source tomorrow. Okay, I'll have another live YouTube session, okay, where we'll go through the first source by, I believe it's Andrew Johnson. Yes, by Andrew Johnson, okay, who is now the president of the United States. We'll go through that tomorrow. And then the last Andrew Johnson one we'll go through on Thursday. Okay, so we'll do one a day. Okay, you guys need to be doing the questions. Okay, and then the CR paragraph at the end. And the whole thing, again, is due on Sunday. Okay, so you guys have the week to do it. Okay, and I'll be breaking it down for you guys, working to help you out, answering questions every day, or at least over the next few days. Okay, so we need to make sure we're staying on top of this. Okay, we will not have a stream on Friday because there are only 3 primary sources. Okay, I will have tutoring on Friday, just like normal. We'll do that via Zoom, so it won't be on here. Okay, but you guys will still have Friday to be working on this, again, because it's not due till Sunday. Okay. Remember that you guys are keeping up with portfolio. Okay, you guys should be getting your portfolio essays back this week, no later than Friday, whoever your house teacher is. The streams will be at 11 every day. Okay, figure at least some of us will be awake at that time. Okay, I can always move it earlier. I've been up for hours, okay, but I know a lot of us are staying up later and don't want to wake up early, okay? So plan on having them at 11, okay, and then I will post them to the YouTube channel afterwards. So if you're not able to make it at that time, you can always watch it there, okay? And any of the ones that we've done previously are also already up there, okay? So you guys make sure you've followed or subscribed to the channel, and you guys should get notified or at least be able to access the playlist, okay, during quarantine. Okay. Any other questions today, you guys? All right, so we're going to be focused on Reconstruction for probably the rest of the school year. Okay, we're going to be going through a bunch of different primary sources, okay, over the next couple weeks. Okay, we may have a week or so to do a few other things at the very end. Okay, but this is going to be our focus. Okay, looking at the period directly after the Civil War, Reconstruction. Okay. Reminder that your test on the presidents is next Monday. Okay, so you guys are studying for that. Okay, and making sure that you're keeping up on your journal, right? The record of our times that we started. That was the first thing I think we did when we went to online learning. Okay, you turned it in once just as a check, but you should have still been keeping up on that. Okay, that's an everyday thing. Okay, you guys are keeping up, just journaling. Okay, it doesn't need to be long every day. Okay, but that will be due in 2 weeks. Okay, so you need to keep up on that. Okay, thank you, Jaybird. Okay, it doesn't notify you, but okay, I'm letting you know, and I'll post every day on Google Classroom so you guys know. Okay, when I'm going to be having these sessions, and this is going to be more often during the Reconstruction part of the unit. Okay, because again, we will be doing a lot of primary sources, and I want to be able to break this down with you a little more personally rather than just posting it. Okay, so it's going to be most days, kind of from here on out, that I'll have this. Again, you can always go on the YouTube channel and see it after the fact if you haven't been able to make it during that time period. Okay. Any last questions, you guys? All right. Well, Feliz Cinco de Mayo, you guys. Okay. Make sure you're doing the CFU for today on Google Classroom as well. Okay. Have a good day. Hope you guys are all doing well. Okay. And hopefully I will see you guys tomorrow. All right.